The more you chase money, the more it will run from you. Stop chasing paper and start chasing your purpose. Money is the byproduct of living in your purpose. Once you figure that out, money will chase you. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Toy Talks podcast. My name is of course Toya Washington, and in this episode I am joined by a very special person. This person is the love of my life, my backbone, my covering, and somebody I am very proud to call my fiancee. I am joined on the podcast by none other than Mr. K.
Have I got you stuttering?
No, you haven't. We just had an argument before. Just a long story, but we're pushing through. Guys, if I sound a bit odd, I apologise. I have a really bad wisdom tooth infection, so it's affecting my energy.
Don't we all know it?
It's affecting my...
If there are any dentists out there listening to this show, please can we provide her free consultation?
Listen, I'm in so much pain and I have a temperature. It's just a lot right now. Like, I just feel under it. But, you know, I have to push through and we move. I did promise you guys that I would be doing a review of Industry on BBC Iplayer.
Great show.
Amazing show. It charters, I think, between 6 to 8 graduates as they navigate the world of work. Ultimately, they are fighting for the spot of being offered a permanent employment.
Survival of the fittest.
Yep, of this organisation. But more importantly, it's about how they navigated work. And I will give an advisory caution. Industry is very sexual and there's a lot of drugs, and if you are on the prudish side, you will be quite taken aback. And I wouldn't necessarily call myself entirely prudish, but it was a lot. Now, the main character is Harper. Harper is a black girl and she comes over from America. And before I kind of share my opinion about the whole of Industry, and as we individually look at the characters, I do want to hear Kay's view on Harper, who's the main character, black girl, mixed race, but black girl.
Is she mixed race?
Yeah, she's mixed race. She talks about it.
Okay.
It's not also as well. I don't know if is it fiction? It is fiction, isn't it? It's just a series, right?
Is, yeah.
So tell me your view. What was your view of Harper as the main character, as the lead?
Well, basically, she was the character who really wanted it the most. So she had really come from absolute poverty. She had nothing. She had faked her results in order to be able to actually get into the organization. So she already had a lot of pressure, and she had to really kind of figure out culturally also. She's coming from the US to the UK. So there was a lot of many different layers to her personality that throughout the 6 to 8 episodes we really got to see develop.
I think for me, Harper's character is really interesting because, number one, she, you know, the episode talks about old money and new money, and Harper wasn't from money, okay? She doesn't have quote unquote privilege, okay? She is a black girl and she's trying to figure it out. Now, I don't know if you guys ever read a book called Dr. Faustus, and Dr. Faustus is a book, I can't remember who wrote the book, about selling his soul to the devil. And I thought it was quite remarkable how Harper sold her soul. And the way she sold her soul was effectively, it was covering for her boss who had lost a client. And as soon as she did that, it was as though she kept then selling her soul, if that makes sense.
But do you think would you really consider that selling your soul? Because, I mean, and what I mean is in the context of who does she have more of an allegiance to? Does she really have an allegiance to this organization, or does she have more of an allegiance to the person who has control over her destiny?
She had an allegiance to her boss, and I'll tell you the reason why. He figured out that she had lied on her examination results, and lied her way into this job. And he basically was slightly manipulative, and I think there's elements on the show of quite predatory behaviour. I'm not necessarily saying from her boss, and her boss's name was Eric. And Eric, you know, he basically covered for her. He didn't ask for anything in return. But I feel like when she covered for him, she did owe him an allegiance, because he could have said something to HR and that was it. And he did try and give her a chance. Like, her boss, Daria, you know, as her boss's character develops, you recognise that Daria's in it for herself, but saw her as a threat. You know, the only person that was really giving Harper a chance was Eric. And whilst he had his own motives, he still didn't dob her in. Do you know what I mean? So for me, when she sold her soul and when she threw him under the bus, albeit the fact that I think that Harper just wasn't aware. Her boss, Daria, basically...
Yeah. I mean, I think the way I looked at it is that you had to kind of... What they were trying to show in the show was the separation of can't really judge a book by its cover. So even though her boss seemed to be like the asshole, in the end, he actually was, I wouldn't say a good guy, but his intentions for supporting her were more for the right reasons versus her counterpart, other boss, who actually turned out to be the devil in disguise.
Yeah. I think one other thing with Harper I found was Harper found it really hard to fit in, and I definitely feel as though she compromised herself a lot, and part of it was fitting in, and the other part of it was self-discovery. She was trying to figure out who she was in a world that was very unclear. The cultural differences were very clear, albeit that she's black, but also from America, and she's having to adapt to this organization. And I think a lot of us do that. We bend over backwards. We kind of mold ourselves sometimes just to fit in. And I guess the question is always, how far is enough? And I also found with...
And I think also like one of the dangers is when you're new in an organization, is that tendency of falling very quickly into those traps as well.
There was a bit in the episode that I really wanted to touch on, and it was where she had reported Eric because he locked her in a room, and I found that really disturbing when he had called her in a room and basically berated her for whatever reason whatever he was talking about. And I think the bit that disturbed me the most is many of us have found ourselves in positions like that. I mean, I'm talking as a black woman here, navigating the world of work as I have and often do, is being called into a room. And I think the bit that unnerved me was when I think he locked the door, but it was very clear that she couldn't freely leave. And then at the Christmas party, she kind of shares that with her boss, Daria, but very off the cuff. And she thought she was in a safe space to have that conversation. And the next day, she's before HR.
So my question would be to you, in those circumstances, as a new, colleague in an organization, how much information should someone be sharing with counterparts?
Well, I think at Christmas parties, I've always said you're still at work. That's the first thing. Secondly of all, I feel like Harper was in a difficult situation. It's something that she needed to report. Okay, what he did was there was no excuse. Yeah, it was disgusting. It was bullying, borderline sadistic behavior.
Okay, and then now my question is what happens in terms of, okay, so imagine now you're Harper, by you going to HR what the consequences are going to be. You already know that's integral to the organization. So is you reporting to HR, how does that normally play out?
Do you know what my thing is? I think she should...
And you haven't been hired yet as well.
I think she should have reported it to her line manager, but I don't think that she should have done it in the way she did it. So she was, intoxicated at a Christmas party. I think she should have controlled that narrative, and I think that she should have, either way, she should have raised it. I get the lever of wanting to be offered a job, but equally, this compromised her safety. Her safety was compromised. Her security was compromised. I think what she should have done is report it to her line manager, but do it in a formal way and control the narrative. Now, the bit that was more disturbing was when she had that off-the-cuff conversation with Daria, and HR, the way they dealt with it is asked her to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That non-disclosure agreement was basically to protect the company. And she did ask in that scene, am I not allowed to read this? When in fact, actually, you're allowed to consult a lawyer. You are allowed to say, I need to take some time. But she felt so pressured to sign it. And many people find themselves in situations where they're pressured to sign something or do something without having the opportunity to think it through.
But what we saw with Harper, it wasn't that she knew immediately that it was wrong. It was almost like when she was being interrogated by her line manager, that she kind of came to the conclusion that what happened wasn't actually the right thing. So I don't think.
No,
Harper,
she knew it was she knew. I don't agree. I think she knew it wasn't the right thing. That's why she had that conversation with Daria, because even though she was intoxicated, she obviously knew something wasn't right about it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have said it. She said it because she knew something wasn't right. Now, that situation in isolation, she should have told her boss, but not in that way. Knowing her boss the way she knew her, Harper had enough emotional intelligence, especially as the way they portrayed her character, to be able to understand that Daria is about herself. And there's parts of the series where we see Harper really understand her line manager, Daria's, her motivations. And Daria's about Daria at the end of the day. The line manager got rid of Eric to further her own career. She didn't care about Harper. But more importantly, it's about us understanding that if a situation is not comfortable, your organisation asks you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, that is a legally binding document. You need to seek some type of legal advice, or at least be able to have the opportunity to take that away and have a look.
Okay, but can we now... So let's imagine the scenario. You're actually in that situation, yeah? They're now putting pressure on you to sign this non-disclosure. What recourse do you really have in those instances?
I get that, and I get that when you're in this situation, you're not really... I get that, but as I said before, I'm more about watching it and learning from it. I want people to watch it and learn from it. And what I will say again is, you are allowed to take legal advice. You are allowed to say, I'm happy to sign this, but I need to take this away and read this in my own time to understand what I'm about to sign. Full stop.
Okay, but then remember, she wasn't yet made permanent staff. So in those situations, what would happen to someone? Meaning that, for example, they didn't sign the non-disclosure. They said they want to take legal recourse. Your organisation knows that at some...
They're not going to sack her, are they? Put it this way, okay? They wouldn't have sacked her because they're too worried about their reputation. They were too worried. That's why they wanted her to sign it in the first place. So they wouldn't have sacked her. There's no way, if she said that she wanted to take it away, they would have said, right, you're sacked. They had already just come off the back of a young graduate having committed suicide. They're already in the press. So they don't want any more negative press. If they didn't care about it, if they didn't care about the situation, they wouldn't have asked her to sign. The whole reason they asked her to sign is because they're worried. So if she had said, the advice I'd given, if she had taken it, they wouldn't have said, right, we're going to sack you then. Right, you're not leaving this room until you sign it. That's not what they would have said. They would have said, okay, that's fine. And I guarantee you, 7 o'clock in the morning, they'll be sitting outside sitting beside her desk, waiting for her to sign. But the problem I think many people face is that they succumb to that pressure. And a lot of it comes from ignorance. Let's not lie. Yeah, everything I've learned is because I've walked through hot coals. Let's not lie. But I think this is why it's important that people watch industry, because there's things that you can learn from it. And it's uncomfortable viewing. It really is. I think another character that I found really interesting was Yasmin. Now, Yasmin, I found her character quite triggering. Now, Yasmin is from what they call old money, okay? Rich girl, probably used to having it all, white privilege, the whole 9 yards. And she, as her character progresses, she ends up asking Harper to move into her house, right? Because Harper needed somewhere to stay. The bit that bothered me about Yasmin is how she weaponized her white privilege to get ahead. Because she had defaulted to becoming the tea girl and the salad collector of Prince. And that is what she thought, that if I'm the salad girl and I'm serving these people, they're going to like me. And when she realised, actually, that's not what's going to get her the perm offer, what she did is took one of Harper's ideas and made it her own. So I guess my question to you is, obviously you watched it, how did you find Yasmin's character?
I thought for someone that's in her early 20s, just graduated, doesn't really understand the world too much, basically the actions that she ended up taking are in line with someone, you know, like her, that you'd expect to happen.
I think for me, Yasmin's character, it was...
Because remember, you have to take yourself back to being 21 years old.
Yeah, but when I take myself back, you've got to remember the work experience of white women privilege is different from the black experience. So for me, Yasmin depicted white women in an office environment whereby they feel that their privilege gives them the right to step on you to get what they want, because that's what Yasmin did to Harper in the room. She stepped on her by taking her idea and making sure she crushed her. That's what she did.
But can I also say that in the situation, so we're dealing here in the world of finance where it's predominantly male dominated, don't you think that she's also, just by being a woman, at a disadvantage, which is also what they were trying to showcase.
And it was. And how did she respond to that disadvantage? She placed herself in a position of tea and coffee girl, and she did that because she knew she needed something to give her an advantage, and she went for likability factor. She went for the cheap option. That's what she did.
But many people do.
They do, and I think for me, it did remind me of very, very early in my career, very early, where I made myself the tea girl, the office tea person, and often found myself using my own money. And I was thinking, this will get me it will score me some points. And what it did is it lowered me in the estimations of people, because I came in at a certain level, but I was so willing to be small for them. Because I thought if I become small for them, they'll like me. And actually what ended up happening is I ended up resenting them, because then when I wanted to cash in, if you like, on being so subservient, they treat me like trash. But the difference is Yasmin's a white girl. So for me, there's a privilege that she had that she did use. So finance, she used her access to finance as a weapon against Harper. Yes, she did. She used her white privilege to advance herself by becoming the office tea girl, and then she used her white privilege and her whiteness to steal Harper's idea and pass it off as her own during a meeting. You watched it?
We see it from a totally different
really?
Perspective. Yes.
So how do you see Yasmin's character then?
I see Yasmin's character as initially being naive. She studies Harper, sees Harper is actually able to maneuver her way around the world of work, decides now to take on some of those characteristics within herself. By taking on some of those characteristics, she actually ends up stepping on Harper's feet. Yeah.
Stepping on her feet or her head?
Whichever. But then Harper herself was doing something similar. So I find it quite
similar to who?
To Yasmin, but I just think
how did she do it to Yasmin?
No, I'm saying Harper was also finding ways to maneuver
but Harper
around.
Never stepped on anybody. Who did Harper step on? Tell me. Harper never stepped on nobody. Who did she step on? The only person I felt like.
But who do you think Yasmin really stepped on? Because it was an accident. It wasn't that she stole Harper's idea.
I think you need to read
She was desperate to come to her line manager with something of.
Didn't you see her in the office? Don't you remember when she was that scene where she's in the room with the client?
Yes, but that was because her boss had told her to make sure that she intervenes in that situation. She intervened in that situation.
No, she intervened by stealing Harper's idea. And do you know why she felt that she could? Entitlement. And do you know why she felt entitled? Because Harper was living in her house. Do you know why she felt entitled? Because of white privilege. That's how white privilege works.
I think in this situation, for me, it was a bit more complex than that.
Okay, well,
it's not just white and black in this instance.
Well, in that situation, like for want of a better example, it was very black and very white. And the point is this: I'm not sitting here saying there's any right or wrong in how they felt they needed to navigate. But I think what is important that we draw out from the episode is there are white women in the office who have white privilege. White people have white privilege.
You know what?
Anyway.
I agree.
And how they use it will either make you or break you in the office.
But in this instances, I think the one that you're referring to, which is Yasmin, I say less so. Because what's happened is she's entered the organization at the bottom. So it's basically a race.
Like everyone else.
Yes, so it's a race for survival. So the one that you could say has more privilege is the line manager. Is it Daria? Yeah, because she's now been able to climb her way up.
I think we're going to agree to disagree because I think it's how you assess privilege. But believe me, as a black woman navigating the world of work, I know only too well what other white women do and how much of a threat they see me and fellow black women and what they're willing to do to crush us to get to where they want to go. Whereas your experience is different because a black man's experience with a white woman is different from a white woman's experience with a black woman. 100%.
Okay, so my question is, when you're looking at the show and you're looking at Yasmin, are you being, when you see her, is it like you're seeing yourself in many different situations like that, where you've come across other people with similar traits and personalities?
Yeah, because I see it as, I've been Yasmin, the bit where I was the office girl, tea girl, and that's where it stops. But I've also, what triggered me about Yasmin is how comfortable she was. This is your friend. This is someone who's living in your house.
Okay, because you see where I would say the time that I saw where Yasmin had privilege was when she had her business contacts that she was able to bring now into the organization to use to share. So that's now where her privilege and the fact that she's come from old money.
Yeah, but sometimes privilege is, it's not as... You see, there's different types of privilege, okay, that white people have. So you're right, where she had that business contacts. But you see how that wasn't her default. Her first go-to option was to be the tea and office girl. It was then to crush Harper, and then it was to use her contacts. But it shows different levels of privilege and how different levels of privilege are activated depending on your level of desperation, depending on how much you want it. Yasmin, to me, represents many white women in the office. Many Karens, many Sarahs. That's what she... You know what? Yasmin was stronger than she made out. 100%.
But then you know what? What's interesting there, and you see why I don't just put it to one side of it basically being about her race. If you see even her relationship with her boyfriend, where she wasn't able to basically be dominating in her personality because of her parents.
But she thought she was better than him.
But she wasn't showing it initially,
So
right?
When you know the bit...
Yeah. So for me here, the privilege really comes from the aspect of, from a financial aspect, where she's maybe not able to relate to someone who doesn't have money.
Okay, well that's another way to look at it.
That's the way I'm looking at it.
That's another way to look at it.
So it's meaning that if you look at the black character, Gus, he came, even though he was black, he came from privilege because he came from a background of money. You know so what? You see Jasmine and Gus in many ways, Gus and Yasmin in many ways were the same character, where Yasmin eventually with time, once she gained confidence, would be like a Gus. But one's black and the other one is white.
You know, it's funny that you talk about Gus. Gus is the black guy in industry, and it was, you know, my assessment of him was, it was really different to see a black guy from money, went to school with a lot of these people, navigating. And I felt like for him, it was a different type of navigating because he was also navigating his sexuality. And I thought what I found really interesting about him is when he decided that he wanted to go and have an interview with Goldman Sachs. And his arrogance didn't get him the job. In fact, his arrogance cost him the job. And even how he processed that, it was a different type of privilege. And it was a privilege that was actually quite nice to see, because when we talk about privilege, we don't always think about black people because we don't necessarily have the type of privilege that we see our white counterparts having. So I guess how did you decipher Gus's character? Like, what was your view on him?
I think Gus's character was easily the most interesting character on the show. The level of complexity, but also the fact he was so confident, even more confident than a lot of the senior management. So he had figured himself out. He understood his sexuality. He understood his position in the world. He knew where he wanted to go. So all of those aspects, he was actually the most complete person and individual because he was fully himself. So the job didn't define him. So whether he got the job or not, he didn't really care because he was confident that in the end, he was going to be going somewhere in life. And I think that was like a very valuable lesson, that confidence and that vision of his kind of work career, he had already been able to map it out at such a young age, because he's maybe 21, 22 at that time. And even in terms of his sexuality, and he understood it, where he had other characters in the show that were still kind of wrestling with their identity.
Okay, I think, Gus's character was really interesting. I'm glad that we got to see confidence, because it was a confidence that Harper was lacking in her character, and Gus had an abundance of it. I think it was also interesting watching him kind of finish his interview at Goldman Sachs and feeling so confident, and it was nice to see what confidence looks like from a black perspective, because that's not always something that we see in the world of work, or at least it's not something that is celebrated. And I definitely feel as though we need to have a lot more Gus's vim in how we kind of navigate the world of work. Even when they moved positions, like they moved jobs, he was still hesitant, but the way he kind of owned it, that was quite refreshing. And I wish that we saw more interaction between Harper's character and Gus. I don't think there was much interaction between the two of them, the two only black graduates on that scheme. That I would have liked to see a bit more interaction between the both of them. I think when talking about the aspect of drugs in the workplace, I have to also share that going into the world of work, I was really ignorant, okay? And I remember working in this particular organisation, and it happens to, actually wasn't even I've worked in the finance industry, but this role in particular wasn't. It was a startup company. And long story short, I worked with sales guys, and I was a PA to two females. And this was years ago. Long story short, I can understand why a lot of the guys in my office were always happy at different parts of the day. Like this type of happiness sometimes they will just squeal and shout, like you would see on a trading floor. I would never understand that. And then come 5 o'clock, they would just be so down. Like it was marginally huge difference in their energy. And I remember one day seeing like a white powdery substance on one of their noses, and even then I hadn't realised. I just assumed it was dry bogey until I think it was somebody in the workplace who had actually told me that that group of guys did drugs. And my question was, where are they doing these drugs? Like, we're in the office. Like, where is this happening? And that was something I was never prepped for, seeing in the world of work. And actually, when I realised they were on drugs, i.e. when somebody told me and then I started to see the pattern, it threw me.
And did you ever find yourself pressured at any time to take any drugs, or were they offered to you?
No. It was never offered to me. I never felt pressured because I never knew it existed, as in doing drugs in the office. But I think the peer pressure that I felt was to fit in is, everyone knows that I love coffee. I'm absolutely obsessed with coffee.
We know?
But you know where that obsession started from? It was at work wanting to fit in, because everybody was going to the kitchen and getting their teas and coffees, and I just wanted to be like them. So I started drinking coffee. It tasted disgusting, but I felt like if I drank coffee, they'd see me as one of them. And that may seem really minor, but I didn't even have the conviction of character to understand that being in the world of work, or fitting in, quote unquote, isn't about changing who I am. It's about being who I am and understanding how to adapt parts of my personality to be able to adapt. So that adaptation could be anything from kind of, not seeing everything as a battle, but rather a challenge. It could be, just different parts. But I was so willing, and I think because in my early 20s, I was taught to be grateful to have a job. So for me, part of keeping that job was to compromise myself, and that coffee did turn into smoking cigarettes. I learned how to smoke cigarettes from work because they were going fag breaks. Oh, do you want to go for a ciggy? I wanted to be part of that, because when they were having those conversations, when they're out to have a ciggy,
I can't imagine you smoking.
But that's the point, and that's it, because it's not what I do. But when they said, can I have a ciggy, I felt so great that they asked me if I wanted to come and have a ciggy. So I'm gonna have a ciggy. And I'm going to tell you, I had the worst chest infection that winter. It was the worst, because I was doing something that, number one, I didn't want to do. Number 2 wasn't natural for me. But also as well, I wasn't doing it because I wanted to do it. I was doing it because I wanted to fit in. So I wasn't even smoking like normal cigarettes. I was smoking like the hard ones. You know, and I never had my own. I was always taken from one of them because, again, like, we're a family. We're all in this together, which is
So how long
bullshit.
were you a smoker for before you realised that then it wasn't for you?
I only did it for a few months. It was the worst few months ever. If I didn't have a chest infection, I had bad breath because of it. If I wasn't having bad breath because of it, my clothes were stinking of it. And during the weekend, I wasn't doing it. You know, and I did learn from that organisation. I learned a lot, but one of the main things I learned was fitting in wasn't dependent on how far I was willing to bend. And it's not about fitting in, it's about adapting, which are two different things. So when I watched Industry, there were a lot of things that triggered me.
I agree, but then when you look at someone like Harper, would you not say that in many aspects she didn't really fold really under any of those pressures? She was still able to kind of stand out and be her own kind of personality.
There were parts where she did fold a little bit,
but
like
then,
with the money, you know, the 50 grand thing.
Okay.
She folded.
Yeah.
But she didn't have to say that, because in my head I was thinking, why did you feel the need to tell everybody publicly that where they got 25k,
okay,
you got
you mean
50?
For the bonus? You need to clarify that.
Yeah. So basically, part of the agreement is if she signed the NDA to keep quiet about what Eric had done and save the company embarrassment, they would allow her to keep the 50k that Eric had basically given her as part of her bonus, when in fact everybody else was only given about 25k. So during a meal with her work colleagues, they were going back and forth and stuff. She was slightly intoxicated, but she did share that actually she got 50k. And I felt in that moment I didn't understand why she shared that, because I didn't feel that was a scene where she had anything to prove. So why do you think she told them that? Because as soon as it came out of her mouth, she must have known that she was going to lose that money.
No.
Wow. I found that so interesting. It was weird.
But I think that was like a perfect situation of someone not having kind of mapped out the consequences of sharing information, which I think a lot of times in work, like even recently in my own workplace, there was a similar situation like that, where something that very borderline happened within the organization, and it would have been very easy for me to share it with other colleagues, but I knew potentially the consequences of me sharing it could mean that it could come back to me.
Yeah.
So there was no benefits for me sharing this information, and so I just kept it totally quiet.
But again, I think it goes down to the point, isn't it? When you're fresh out of uni and you're going into a job, you're so fresh that you don't know what the rules of engagement are. And this is the reason why I have the Toy Talks podcast.
And also how quickly a rumor can spread. So you can tell it to one person, by the end of the day, it's gone 10 people down the line.
I agree. And like I said, this is the reason why I have the Toy Talks podcast, because I think it's important for people to understand how to navigate the world of work. And this goes to any age, any background. As a black woman, the rules of engagement are different. And more importantly, being self-aware sometimes comes from bad experiences. And I'm trying to limit the amount of bad experiences that black women go through in navigating the world of work, because success shouldn't equal pain. But equally, I think there needs to be a self-awareness, there needs to be a self-discovery that happens as part of learning how to navigate the world of work. And for me, like one of the motivations for the podcast is to provide that safe space.
Yeah, and I think having a game plan and a strategy is also extremely important, where a lot of times I think, especially when you're starting in a new organization, the only strategy you have is just for people to basically like you. And it's survival, which means in those instances, you're going to compromise on a lot of your values, a lot of your principles, and in the end, they come back to bite you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Listen, I really want you guys to go ahead and have a watch of Industry on BBC Iplayer. It will, if you haven't watched it already, and then go and have a watch. and then come back and listen to the podcast, or maybe you've watched it already. It'll be great to hear some of your thoughts as well. So make sure you DM me on social media. I want to hear how, was you triggered by any of the themes? For me, grooming, predatory behavior, being paralyzed with fear, ignorance of work toxicity, racial insecurity, peer pressures to fit in, was all things that happened quite pervasively on the show. And I think what is really, really important is we kind of use it as a learning tool. I learned a lot by watching it. I would say for me, what I learned more importantly is how important it is to educate the younger generation. The younger generation have access to social media and therefore have access to communication. And it's really important that we create dialogue, because education happens every day in our life, but the education we get at work can literally alter the journey of what the world of work looks like for us. So I guess I'm going to take this point to ask you, what did you learn from watching Industry?
Well, it brought back a lot of memories for me from when I first started in the world of work. And one of the things that was kind of like kept coming back as a theme was like how I wish I could go back to when I was at that age, and all the things that I would have been able to now kind of teach myself, all the obstacles and traps that I could have avoided, which is why I'm really proud of basically what your platform does, because this is really something that, like, when we were growing up, when we were 18, 19, 20, and if we had found out about a platform like this, it really provides you an insight into how you need to be thinking, what are going to be some of the faults. And I think that ability of actually storytelling, which is what you do, and sharing stories of your world of work, even if it's not necessarily in the same domain, but people can just relate to it very easily. So even sometimes when you share with me within our own house some of these stories, I always find them very fascinating, crazy. Some of them are absolutely crazy, because you've had like 100 life experience in terms of the worlds of work. Like, I've had some bad ones, but yours is like epic. But yeah, so I'm really proud of how you're so open and you share this information with the people.
Thank you, because I feel like it's really difficult, because I have to go to places that I have kind of buried, and I often tell people that I find the podcast very cathartic, and I didn't realise that in going through such a tempestuously, highly triggering work life was to prepare me for this and what I do and the Toy Talks podcast platform. And if I could go back to my early 20s, I would tell myself, if I could speak to the 20-year-old Toya or 21-year-old Toya, I would say, take your time, don't be in a rush. Your 20s are the figuring out stage. You're allowed to figure it out and develop an identity. Give yourself permission to have an identity that's different from the masses, and that's okay.
And don't let the fear take over, because I think that's it. The fear of the unknown is the thing that kind of takes over your spirit. And if you've come across those wrong people who can sense that sense of fear, and they've already gone through it, they know how to manipulate it against you. And those are the things that, like, let's say I maybe myself haven't necessarily felt it directly that way, but I have seen colleagues around me who have been in those situations, and it was just because they let someone else basically take over.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad, because I think there were a lot of things that I went through in my early 20s at work, and a lot of trauma that I have had to work through. I mean, the last episode of the podcast, I talk about trauma, and it was a lot emotionally to kind of go back there, but it has made me who I am today. It has made me a subject matter expert in the world of work, but more importantly, how to navigate the world of work. And when I talk about navigating, it is the due diligence that we have to do. It is kind of thinking about kind of how you create your boundaries and what those boundaries look like. When people say, oh, at work it feels like a family, I just think that is just, it just doesn't I don't agree with that concept for many reasons, but I hope what I do with the podcast is take people on a journey. And in sharing some of my stories and my experiences in the way that I do, it's to bring to life what those actual experiences look like, but more importantly, that people will learn some lessons that have guided me to where I am now. And yes, I've attained a level of success in my career, but ultimately, the true success is being able to have conviction in who I am as a black woman in the world of work, and understanding that that is my leverage, and how I use that leverage and how I navigate is equally as important as waking up every day and going to work, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and I would say, like, kind of going along on this journey with you, one of the things that's been very important and enlightening for me was that I just assumed, us both being black, we basically go through the same experiences, where you've really opened that door for me to actually see that there's a whole other world that I didn't understand what black women go through in the world of work. And, when you share with me in terms of, on the platform, like some of the stories that your women share, and that really kind of opens up my mind to things that I had never really even began to think about. And I think there's probably a lot of other black men, if they do listen to the platform, or have their partners, who have their partners who listen to the platform, would now look at things differently. Like, I'll now maybe even want to have that conversation with my mother to kind of understand how it was for her going through the world of work, where I never would have ever thought about that.
It's funny that you say that, because there were two instances where I felt that you really did understand. I think it started to click for you.
But at the start, I didn't, though.
No, you didn't. And you know what? I respect you for your honesty. But the first one was when I did my first Toy Talks Live event. And you were amazing as a support system in terms of just making sure that I needed everything I needed to be able to kind of do my first live event. And I watched you watch all these amazing black women that attended participate, take notes, and more importantly, they were just so happy to be a part of the Toy Talks journey, because they recognized that this was for them. And I think when you observed how many black women's lives were being changed before your eyes, I think that is when I saw the click for you. The second time was when I told you I was working for a quite renowned tech company, and there was that black guy that I told you about, and they say not all skin folk is kin folk. And remember when he kind of he just treated me really badly in the office, and he switched on me, and he said some horrible things in the middle of an office because he thought he could. And also because he was so loyal to his proximity to any type of whiteness in the office, even though he was a black guy. And I remember coming home and telling you, and you were like, he would never treat you like that if you were as a man, and even less so if you was a black man. And you were so shocked that that was the treatment I was being I was receiving. And I had to let you know, okay, that's not new. That is, as a black woman, that is often our experience. That level of aggression, that level of intimidation, that level of abuse. And actually, how I dealt with it was, I thought it was the best way, and I dealt with it in the way I knew how, and I, used the leverage that I needed to deal with it. But you was really upset by it, and that upset allowed me to realize that you understood that the black woman experience, like working whilst black, it's difficult.
Yeah, because I think one of the key situations is, let's say even now I have a white male colleague, he will maybe cross the line in certain aspects, but at the end of the day, we're both men. So there's that element of respect, of he knows there's only so far that he's going to be able to talk to another man, without there being some type of consequences. So just even subconsciously, I think, how another man will speak to you, depending if he respects you, even from let's say from a point of view in terms of presence.
You mean males?
Yes, in terms of presence, even if he's more senior, there will be a limit to how far he will be willing to go or feel comfortable going?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one, because I've worked with black guys obviously in the office, and I know that their experience is very different to mine as a black woman. But what I think is reassuring is that you've gone on this journey and you have seen it, and actually the support that you give me and the encouragement you give me when I kind of have to deal with really difficult situations, I appreciate that. Equally, I recognise the strength as black women that we have, and I say, when I talk about strength, I mean the strength in conviction. We walk into the office hypersensitive, good, rightly or wrongly, good or bad. That is our advantage as well. It's a form of leverage, because we see things sometimes often unfolding, and we are very aware of self, you know. And I think we need to be able to congratulate ourselves on our leverages as black women. And if this platform serves as anything, it is a reminder that not only can we navigate the world of work, but we can do so fully understanding what our leverage is, and fully understanding that we are allowed to be in this space.
So I have a question for you. As a black woman in the world of work, what would you expect for black, or how could black men, let's say, participate more in terms of helping?
I think that's a really great question, and I think, number one, I think the platform serves as a good source of information if somebody, wants to educate themselves on some of the experiences that we have as black women. I think also as well, there needs to be an acknowledgement and an open-mindedness with our black brothers about what our experiences are, and allowing us to table that experience to them. I think that it can't be assumed that the black woman experience is the same as a black man. And I think even for me, I don't assume that my experiences are the same for you. I ask you, what are your experiences as a black man, and you share that with me. And I think there needs to just be a respect for black women in general, that actually what we go through is so much trauma, and it's so much politics that actually it often shapes the way we see the world. And I think there needs to be an understanding that our experiences are generally similar, if not the same, as black women. And I think there just needs to be an education piece, and that education comes from having an open mind. So that's kind of how I'd answer that question. But listen, guys, I'm going to draw this episode to a close. I have really enjoyed delivering this episode to you and having a critical analysis on industry on BBC Iplayer. I encourage you all to go and have a listen and a watch. Go and have a watch. If I haven't said this already, I'm going to say it now. The Toy Talks podcast was listed as number 46 in the business section of Spotify. Number 46, that's top 50 on Spotify 2020, and I couldn't be more proud, and I'm so grateful, because each and every one of you have made that possible. Each and every one of you who has listened, downloaded, recommended, actively participated, sent me your dilemmas, have all contributed to that. And there would be no Toy Talks podcast if it wasn't for you. There'd be no Toy Talks platform if it wasn't for you. I am so humbled to be able to deliver a podcast to you and create a platform that is transforming the lives of black women all over the world, as I teach you, as I advise you and motivate you on how to navigate the world of work, and in turn light up the path of your success. So I'm going to draw it to a close. Would you like to say anything to the audience before we close this episode?
It's been great.
He's a man of few words, but I'm really happy that I had him on the podcast episode. I'm going to draw it to a close, and I'm going to thank each and every one of you for joining me. If you want to follow me on social media, my social media handles, my personal Instagram page is Toya_Washington. The Toya Talks Instagram page is Toya_Talks. Follow me on Snapchat, Toya Washington, all one word, or Twitter, Toya_W. If you want to visit the website, it's www.toyatalks.com. I want to thank each and every one of you for making this episode possible. I'll see you again next Tuesday for another episode of the Toy Talks podcast. I want to thank each and every one of you who continues to pour so much blessings into my life. I love each and every one of you, and thank you so much for this journey. See you again next Tuesday. My name is Toya Washington, and you have been listening to the Toya Talks podcast.